Someone you know is going to die. Maybe not today, maybe not this year, but at some point you're going to stand in a room or a church or a cemetery and you're going to do something that feels completely natural. You're going to say something. You're going to place something. You're going to mark the moment like it matters. You've never been questioned why you did that. But here's the thing. That impulse to stop, to grieve, to bury is not a cultural invention. It is not something religion created or civilization taught you. It predicts language. It predicts farming. It predicts everything we normally call human. And the story of how we know that will permanently change how you think about death. Let's start 430,000 years ago in northern Spain. Deep inside a cave system called Sima de los Huesos, which translates to the pit of bones, archaeologists discovered something that took decades to explain. At the bottom of a 43-foot vertical shaft, they found the skeletal remains of at least 28 individuals, not scattered randomly across the cave floor, not dragged there by predators, placed, deliberately carried to a specific location and dropped into a pit so deep and so inaccessible that there was no practical reason for any living person to go near it. These were not modern humans. They were Homo heidelbergensis, a species that predates us by hundreds of thousands of years. They had no writing, no religion we can identify, no complex language as far as the fossil record shows. But they carried their dead to a specific place and put them somewhere intentional. That's not instinct. Animals don't do that. That is a decision made by a mind that understood something had ended and believed that ending deserved a response.
For most of the 20th century, archaeologists assumed that kind of awareness was uniquely ours, that Neanderthals, the closest relatives we coexisted with, were too cognitively limited to feel grief the way we do, that burial was something only modern humans invented. Then, the evidence started piling up. In 1908, in a cave in southwestern France called La Chapelle aux Saints, researchers found a Neanderthal skeleton buried in a deliberately dug pit. The body had been positioned carefully, placed in a fetal position. Stone tools and animal bones were arranged in the surrounding soil.
Skeptics pushed back for decades. Maybe the pit was a natural formation. Maybe the objects were coincidental. Maybe researchers were projecting emotion onto bones. Then, they found more. At Shanidar Cave in Iraq, a Neanderthal burial contained something that stopped the excavation team entirely. Clustered around the skeleton were dense concentrations of pollen from at least 8 different species of flowering plants. Pollen is so concentrated it couldn't have been blown naturally. The interpretation, debated, challenged, but never completely dismissed, is that someone gathered wildflowers and laid them across that body 60,000 years ago. Think carefully about what that act requires. You have to feel the loss. You have to want to do something about it. You have to believe, on some level, that the gesture matters, even though the person can no longer see it or feel it. You are doing something for the dead, not for survival, not for the group's immediate benefit, for the dead. That's grief, recognizable and specific, across 60,000 years, in a species that textbooks used to describe as primitive brutes. But it goes further back than Neanderthals. At a site in South Africa called Border Cave, archaeologists uncovered the remains of an infant, buried, deliberately placed in the earth. Next to the body was a perforated shell, a shell with a hole worn through it, the kind you thread onto a cord and wear. It had been placed with the child intentionally. The infant was less than 1 year old. The burial is 74,000 years old. Someone dug a hole in the ground. Someone lowered a child into it. Someone placed something beautiful beside that child. Something that had no practical value. Something that existed only as an object of meaning.
and then covered it all up.
74,000 years ago, before agriculture, before any civilization anyone has ever been named, a parent buried their baby with jewelry. There is no practical reason to do that. You don't do it for survival. You don't do it because it helps the group. You do it because the loss is unbearable, and doing nothing feels wrong. That feeling is not modern. That feeling is ancient, in a way that should stop you cold.
Now, here is where it gets more complex. Around 30,000 years ago, burial practices didn't just continue, they escalated dramatically. At a site called Sungir in Russia, archaeologists uncovered something that genuinely shocked the field. 2 children, buried head-to-head in a single grave. The older child was covered in more than 5,000 mammoth ivory beads. Not scattered, sewn. Carefully sewn into clothing that has long since decomposed, leaving only the beads behind as a ghost outline of what the garments once looked like. Fox teeth had been arranged along the collar. Carved ivory animals were placed beside the bodies. A straightened mammoth tusk, nearly 8 feet long, lay across the grave. Researchers calculated how long it would have taken to produce those beads alone, drilling through dense ivory, 1 bead at a time with stone tools. The estimate was approximately 10,000 hours. 10,000 hours of labor. For a burial? That is not a community barely surviving. That is a community with a belief system sophisticated enough to justify months of collective effort for a single ritual moment. These people understood death as something that required a response proportional to the life that was lost. They were making a statement about value, about what a person is worth, in the only language available to them. Objects, placements, labor, time. Archaeologists call the period around 40,000 to 30,000 years ago the period of behavioral modernity. It's the point in the fossil and archaeological record where humans stopped simply reacting to the world and started constructing meaning inside it. Art appears. Long-distance trade appears. Complex tools appear. And burial, deliberate, elaborate, costly burial, appears everywhere at once. Death, it turns out, was one of the first problems humans decided to solve not practically, but symbolically. And here is what the record keeps showing. Across every continent where early humans lived, across hundreds of thousands of years, across multiple species that are not even us, the same structure repeats. Someone dies. The group stops. The group responds. The group marks it. The specific objects change, the rituals change, the beliefs change. But the underlying pattern, the refusal to just walk away, never does. Why? The most compelling explanation comes from evolutionary anthropology. Humans are one of the only animals on Earth with a clear cognitive understanding of their own future death.
We know from a relatively young age that we are going to die. We know the people we love are going to die. That awareness creates a psychological problem that no other animal has to manage in the same way. And ritual, the act of doing something deliberate and meaningful at the moment of loss, may be one of the primary ways early humans managed that terror. You cannot stop dying. You cannot reverse it. But you can respond to it in a way that asserts it matters, that the life has weight, that absence is real and the community acknowledges it. That is what rituals do. It converts an unbearable fact into a bearable experience. There is also a social function that researchers have studied extensively. A burial is a public statement. This person was one of us. Their absence changes something here. The ritual gathers the group around a shared loss, and in doing so, holds the group together. Grief performed collectively is also cohesion. It is the living reminding each other that they are connected by something beyond immediate survival.
Some anthropologists argue this was one of the critical behaviors that allowed early human groups to grow beyond small family units. Other social animals fragment after a significant death. Leadership hierarchies collapse, groups splinter. Humans developed a mechanism, ritual mourning, that did the opposite. It pulled people toward each other at the exact moment loss threatened to push them apart. Collective grief may have been one of the foundations of human society. By the time complex civilizations emerged, this impulse has been formalized, institutionalized, and in some cases, industrialized. Ancient Egypt is the most visible example. The pyramids dominate the image, but they represent only the extreme end of a practice that touched every level of Egyptian society. Ordinary workers were buried with food, tools, games, letters, personal objects, not because anyone knew exactly what happened after death, but because the idea of sending someone into the unknown with nothing felt wrong in a way that was impossible to ignore. The specific theology was new. The specific objects were new. The underlying refusal to let a person disappear without acknowledgement, that was 400,000 years old. In ancient Greece, the failure to bury someone properly was considered one of the worst fates imaginable. Not for the living, for the dead. The soul of an unburied person was believed to wander, unable to rest. Entire wars in Greek mythology turn on the question of whether a body will receive proper burial. The Iliad ends not with a battle, but with a funeral. In ancient China, ancestor veneration, the practice of maintaining a relationship with the dead through ritual offerings and remembrance, became one of the central organizing principles of society. The dead weren't gone. They were present, and they required tending.
Across Mesoamerica, across sub-Saharan Africa, across the prehistoric sites of Australia, everywhere humans have ever lived, the same fundamental question has been asked at the moment of death. What do we do now? And everywhere, across every culture that has ever existed, the answer has never been nothing. Here is the full picture. 430,000 years ago, a pre-human species carried their dead to a specific pit in northern Spain for reasons we still cannot fully explain. 60,000 years ago, Neanderthals were laying flowers on bodies. 74,000 years ago, a parent buried an infant with a shell. 30,000 years ago, communities were spending the equivalent of years of labor preparing a single grave. 5,000 years ago, entire civilizations were building the largest structures on Earth to house their dead. The scale changed. The theology changed. The objects changed. But the moment, the specific human moment of standing over someone you have lost and refusing to simply walk away, that moment has not changed at all. The next time you stand at a graveside and feel that pull, the need to say something, to place something, to stay a little longer than is practical, to mark the moment in some way that feels inadequate but necessary. You are not following a custom. You are not performing a tradition someone else invented. You are doing something your species has done longer than your species has had a name for itself, longer than we have language to describe the feeling, longer than we had gods to explain where the dead were going. The rituals changed, the words changed, the beliefs changed, but the refusal to let someone disappear without acknowledgement, that has never changed once in 430,000 years. And somewhere, right now, in every time zone on Earth, someone is standing over a grave doing exactly what that pre-human did in a cave in northern Spain nearly 500,000 years ago. Stopping, responding, mark it. Because some things are older than civilization. Some things are older than humanity itself. And grief is one of them.